Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today's video is going to be about another twin lens reflex camera. In this case, it is going to be the Airesflex. This was one of a number of camera models which Aires produced in the mid-1950s. They began producing TLR cameras around 1950 or so, and continued producing them up into the late 1950s. Although 120 film and medium format photography was kind of declining in popularity in the folding cameras, things like the Mamiya 6 or the Olympus 6 or the Konica Pearl series, twin lens reflex camera sales were still quite strong, or if not strong, at least better than the other medium format cameras. And so the makers continued to manufacture these for some time after they stopped producing the folding medium format cameras. I reviewed maybe 2 years ago, I think, the Aires Automat, which was the most sophisticated twin lens reflex camera which Aires produced. The regular Airesflex, this was a more simplified and less expensive version, but is very much similar, or I would say in the results you get on the film compared to the Aires Automat, they would be exactly the same on this camera, because this camera features the same shutter and lens which came on the Aires Automat. The only difference is that this camera has a more simplified operating system. I don't mean more simplified. The Automat had a combined shutter charging and film winding system, which I guess simplified operation. This camera has two separate steps, like some of the older Yashica Flex cameras. But what I mean by simplified is a simpler mechanism where there's less possibility for problems. An issue which I've had with cameras like the Aires Automat or other ones which have a combined shutter charging and film winding mechanism is that this mechanism can be a little unreliable or prone to failure, whereas the old system, which came on the earlier cameras, is much more reliable. An interesting thing about these Airesflex cameras was the variety of lenses which were made available in them. The most common lens which came in the Airesflex cameras was the Olympus Zuiko lens, which was quite a popular lens among a variety of makers in those days. Olympus made lenses not just for their own cameras, but of course for Aires and Mamiya and other makers as well. The only issue is that these 50s Olympus lenses, which came in the medium format cameras, are prone to haze. You see that a lot in the Mamiya 6 folding cameras or Olympus's TLR cameras. It's very hard to find any of those cameras which don't have haze on the lenses. Aires put those on most of their cameras, and then they used a couple of other lenses. They used their own brand of lens, which was called the Excelsior lens, if I remember right. And I don't see a lot of the Aires cameras with this lens. I'm not sure if they actually made it or if they just took like a Tri-Lausar lens or something like that and just put a different name on it, or if they actually made it. And the other option was the Nikkor lens, or Nippon Kogaku, which they shortened to be Nikon or Nikkor when they were talking about lenses. And this particular model is fitted with the Nippon Kogaku lens, which is a very highly regarded lens when it comes to TLR photography. The only TLR cameras to come with this lens were made by Aires, and they're fairly hard to come by, and the ones with the Nikkor lenses get a premium over the ones which have the Olympus Zuiko lenses, which are almost useless because the lenses in those cameras are almost all faded to the point where they have a serious negative effect on the images. And the Excelsior lens, which while it is a rarer lens, it of course doesn't have the same reputation for quality as lenses made by the Nikon company. I really like the quality of the lenses. These lenses have a good coating. They don't suffer from the haze problems with some of the other lenses suffer from, and they are excellent performers. And among the cameras made in Japan back in the 1950s, it's hard to beat the lens which came in this camera. So let's go ahead and take a look at this Airesflex and the features, controls, and functions of it. And the first thing I noticed when I pick up this camera is that unlike most of the other cameras which were produced at that time, this one is actually covered with real leather and not covered with vinyl or imitation leather, which I think 95% of other Japanese cameras were covered with in those days. It's nice to see that they took the extra step in regards to quality. And surprisingly, the original leather, even though it's a very, I guess, organic and biodegradable product, seems to be longer lasting than the vinyl or plastic covering which comes on many of the other cameras. This, of course, can be scratched a little bit more easily, and of course it can be peeled off, but it doesn't seem to suffer from the cracking or dry rot problems which the vinyl coverings on these cameras often suffer from. Another interesting thing is the exposure guide on the back. And this is very similar to the guide which comes on Rolleiflex cameras. Not quite the same as like when I was describing the Olympus wide camera a couple of videos ago. That one I think is a little bit more sophisticated. This one is more simple and easy to understand. And what this has is just a list of conditions here and a list of film speed settings and a list of suggested aperture and shutter speed settings adjustments. So it's quite easy to use, and if you look at this for a good 15 or 20 minutes before you go out shooting the camera, you'll probably understand basically how it works, and you'll be able to take serviceable photos without actually needing to use a light meter. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top of the camera, and of course we have here the same focusing hood which we find on pretty much any TLR camera of this era. It has the same pop-up focusing loop and also the same kind of sports finder. Very simple system and very easy to use. This one has an especially bright finder. It looks like it has not just a simple a focusing screen on it, but it has a Fresnel screen under the focusing screen which amplifies the light a bit and allows you to get a brighter image, a brighter focusing image. So that makes the focusing a little easier and more precise, especially if you're shooting in situations where there are less light. For example, you're in the woods or something like that, and it's a little bit harder to focus on things like trees or whatever. Cameras like this and rangefinder cameras, they do a wonderful job on focusing on things where there are a lot of contrast. But when the light begins to get a little bit dark, they can be a little bit more hard to focus. But the addition of Fresnel lenses in these old cameras makes a big difference. I'm not sure if this is the same one which comes on some of the other ones. Some of them have actually a large glass inside, a Fresnel glass. It looks like it might have it in here as I'm looking through the top, but I'll have to find out when I take apart the camera to service it. Moving on the left side here, we have the simple lugs here on either side for mounting a strap or putting the camera in its case. We have a shoe here for mounting a flash, and of course you can, if you're using a flash, there's a flash socket here on the bottom of the camera. We have the pins here on the side, and these are the kind of the Yashica style pins which lock in the upward position, which makes it a little bit easier to load the film. Not all makers added this feature to their cameras. It was a little bit of extra expense, and in the really competitive days, in the 1950s, when raw materials were expensive and they had to try to keep costs low where they could. This is one of the areas where you usually see the effect of the cost cutting. So Aires didn't do, was actually pretty generous in this, like Yashica, where other cameras, they didn't go to the extra detail of adding these locking pins here. Moving over to the other side here, this side is pretty much identical to like the Yashica Flex A camera or earlier Yashica Flex cameras. We have the film winding knob here with a release button in the center. As you wind the film, you'll see the film counter moving here, and when the number lines up in the center, the film winder stops moving and you push in the center, and then you could wind it to the next exposure. Here we have the focusing ring, and this one here is arranged in meters, not meters and feet like some of the other cameras. And above that we have a depth of field scale, which allows you to see how much depth of field you have at any given aperture. And here we have the reset switch, and when you are going to load film in the camera, you operate the reset switch by pushing in the button here and pushing up this lever here. or actually in this case pulling it down, it is a little bit different from Yashica, and that will cause the S to show up in the winder, and that means the camera is ready to load and start the next roll of film. On the front of the camera here, we have the basic controls, more or less the same as most other cameras of this day. A couple of minor exceptions. One of them is the film charging system, which is done by pulling this to the side instead of having a lever here on the right side, which many cameras do. Here we have the shutter release button. On the side here, we have the shutter speed selector lever, and on this side here, we have the aperture selector lever. Very simple and straightforward, and we have a full range of shutter speeds from bulb and 1 second all the way up to 1/500th of a second. So that gives this camera an advantage over a lot of the cameras of that day, when the maximum shutter speed could be usually between 1/100th of a second, like on the old Recoflex cameras, up to 1/400th of a second, which was the maximum speed on most cameras. To be able to get that extra up to 1/500th of a second was a pretty good feature. It wasn't necessarily important back in those days because they didn't really have high-speed films, but if you're one of those really crazy people who likes to shoot sports with a twin-lens reflex camera, being able to select a 1/500th speed is really handy. It kind of freezes the action and allows you to get a good picture of an athlete or a kid running around without it being too blurry. We have the shutter release button here, and it has a threaded collar around the bottom, and on the threaded collar you can put an early cable release, which has the built-in adapter for it, or you can get a separate adapter which will screw on there and allow you to use a standard cable release. The lenses here, as I mentioned, they are the Nippon Kogaku 75mm f3.5 lens, an outstanding lens and one of the best which you can get in a TLR. And we have a bayonet mount here for attaching the filters. I believe this is a, oh man, I'm getting my old TLR bayonet things mixed up. I think it's a B1. I think the B2 is like one of the scarcer ones, certainly not a B3. But anyway, this allows you to use filters and, of course, kind of the bayonet style lens hoods. The bottom of the camera, we have a standard 1/4-inch tripod adapter, and we have a release switch here which allows you to unlock the latch on the bottom and open the film door like so. And inside the camera, pretty basic here. Loading the film is quite simple. You would put your roll of new film here in the bottom. You would affix your take-up spool here in the top. You would pull the paper from the roll of film over the rollers and feed it into the take-up spot. Make sure that you have the film loaded the right way. Unlike 35mm film, which pretty much only goes in one way, with 120 film, different cameras require the film to be loaded differently, so it is possible to put it in wrong. It's quite possible to put it in backwards. And I say that because sometimes I get these cameras in which for repair or to resell, and they have the film in them backwards. So the way to know that you have it loaded right is that the colored paper is coming up over the back, and of course you can see the brand name and numbers and things like that. If you have the film loaded wrong, it's just going to be black. You'll be seeing the black side of the paper. So if you're winding the film and it's black, take out the film roll, flip it around and put it so the colored side is facing to the top and running across. When you feed it into the take-up spool, as I've mentioned in previous videos, always use your finger to push. You can see my finger here, to keep it tight against the take-up spool so it doesn't pull out of the slot, and that way you won't waste a few exposures trying to take photos when the film isn't actually winding. And yeah, it's a simple thing to do, simple insurance, and you'll be able to tell when the film is being pulled properly, or at least the paper is being pulled properly by the winding knob. You just continue winding and winding and winding, and you will eventually see an arrow across the paper backing of the film, and you will line it up with these two red marks on either side of the film chamber here. When that is lined up, simply close the door, latch it, make sure the door is closed. Sometimes the latch doesn't sit properly on these and you might not have it latched securely. The door may open. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Go ahead to the other side of the camera here and then simply just start winding and winding and winding until the number 1 shows up. When the number 1 shows up, the film is ready, and what you have to do next is you have to set your exposure So if I'm using, say, 100 speed film today on a sunny day, I'll set the aperture to f16 and my shutter speed to 1/100th of a second. I'll go ahead and charge the shutter. I'll pop open the focusing hood. I'll pop open the focusing loop. And I will carefully compose and focus, and then simply depress the shutter button, take a photo, and then push the button, and that will allow me to wind to the next frame. And when I put away the camera, simply push down the magnifier. Make sure you always do that. You don't want to try to close the camera with the magnifier. That can bend it and damage it. And either put away the camera or go ahead and take another photograph. It's quite a simple thing and a really easy camera to use. Anyway, that's it for my video about the Airesflex twin lens reflex camera. This one I'm working on right now, and I'll have it listed for sale in my store tonight with a lot of other stuff. I'm planning to list a dozen or more cameras for sale later on today. So if you'd like to take a look and see what those are, please visit my online store. Or I'll probably have them in my Etsy store. You'll find a link to that in the description below the video. If you like this video and you want to see more, please click the like button and subscribe, that is. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.